Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a geopolitical reality that, honestly, completely shatters the rules of modern warfare. As an investigative journalist, looking into this has been pretty mind-blowing. We are looking at a highly counterintuitive, deeply systemic crisis. How exactly did a tiny, unrecognized militia, a group with absolutely no formal navy, manage to essentially hold the entire global economy hostage? We're going to break down a modern conflict that has quietly, but very systematically, rewritten the rules of international trade and security. And they did it right under the noses of the world's most powerful nations.
To really grasp the sheer gravity of this situation, you just have to look at the raw data. 100. That is the number of verified attacks on commercial vessels between November 2023 and October 2025. And these weren't just isolated incidents. They directly impacted over 60 different nations. This sets the stage for a crisis of unprecedented scale, proving for sure that this was never just some localized disturbance. No, this was a massive shock to the global system.
The militia with no navy. So, you really have to ask yourself, how does an unrecognized faction with no formal navy, literally zero air force, and absolutely no international standing achieve such massive asymmetric disruption? Well, the answer lies in geography. Wide-open, historic naval combat zones versus tight, vulnerable, modern maritime choke points. We actually need to completely throw out our old mental models of naval warfare. Historic naval combat involved massive armadas clashing out in vast, wide-open oceans. But today's conflict, it exploits extremely tight, highly vulnerable, modern maritime choke points. In these cramped quarters, those multi-billion-dollar aircraft carriers and sophisticated destroyers completely lose their open water advantage. The geography itself literally becomes the weapon. Controlling the global choke point. Because it's actually not about having military superiority at all. It's entirely about controlling a specific geographical bottleneck. A small, highly motivated group can exert absolute control using asymmetric weaponry right from the water's edge. And that specific geographic reality is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Now, don't just think of this strait as a body of water. Think of it more like an unavoidable hallway. If you were moving international shipping from Asia to Europe through the Red Sea, you are fundamentally forced to walk down this exact hallway. It connects Yemen to the Horn of Africa, and it serves as the absolute critical artery for global trade stability. There are literally no easy detours here. If this hallway gets blocked, global trade gets blocked. Period. Just look closely at the exact geography framing this waterway. You've got the Bab el-Mandeb squeezed tight between Yemen and the Horn of Africa. Specifically, we're talking about nations like Djibouti, Somaliland, and Eritrea. This extreme physical proximity creates some very unique maritime vulnerabilities. The waterway is so narrow right here that a militia based in Yemen doesn't even need a navy to project power. They can literally reach right across the water using land-based systems, expertly exploiting this geographical bottleneck to trap passing commercial traffic. And the economic fallout from this? It's practically mathematical. Step 1. A single, incredibly cheap drone successfully strikes a high-value commercial vessel. Step 2. In response to that localized risk, massive global shipping conglomerates panic, and they instantly redirect their entire global flows. Step 3. International insurers re-rate the entire corridor, and just like that, shipping premiums skyrocket. So one cheap drone, logically and inevitably, guarantees a multi-billion-dollar economic shock. It's a staggering chain reaction. Anatomy of an escalation. So how exactly did a localized threat spiral into an unavoidable global standoff? Let's trace the anatomy of this escalation. Here is the exact timeline of how this crisis unfolded. Back in November 2023, that initial wave of over 100 vessel attacks begins. Fast forward to March 2025, and the situation has gotten so dire that the United States launches a major air campaign. But then, jump to October 2025, an Oman-brokered deal attempts to halt those strikes. Finally, in February 2026, that fragile peace just completely breaks down, leading to renewed strikes and a severe escalation involving Iran. You can see how this timeline maps a very clear path from a localized disruption directly into a massive superpower intervention. The failed superpower campaign. This actually brings us to what I think is the most shocking geopolitical revelation of this entire sequence, the tactical failure of a superpower campaign. I mean, when the world's preeminent military steps in, we naturally expect a swift victory, right? Well, that is definitely not what happened here. Between March and May of 2025, the United States conducted a major, overwhelming air campaign against the militia.
Yet, when we impartially look at the results on the ground, the campaign simply failed to neutralize the group's tactical control over the Red Sea. The overwhelming, multi-billion-dollar force of the U.S. military was effectively stonewalled by the militia's persistent, unbreakable, and highly asymmetrical grip on this vital shipping corridor.
Which leads us to an absolutely stunning concession. America negotiated with a rebel militia. In October 2025, that Oman broker deal was struck, and the terms? The United States agreed to halt its military strikes strictly in exchange for the Houthis ceasing their attacks on U.S. vessels. Just let that sink in for a second. The greatest military force on Earth didn't achieve a decisive military victory. They ended up negotiating terms with an unrecognized rebel group basically as equals.
The undeclared global war. At this point, we're no longer just looking at a tactical timeline. We are looking at the deep, structural power dynamics of a completely new geopolitical reality. We have essentially entered the era of the undeclared global war. The old military rulebook? It's been completely voided.
Past undeclared wars versus modern asymmetric maritime conflict. Now, we've definitely seen undeclared wars before, right? Syria in 2011, Iraq in 2003, even Yemen in 2015. But those were largely land-based regime changes or civil wars. This modern asymmetric maritime conflict in the Red Sea is structurally completely different. It proves that a local group can literally choke out the global economy right from the shoreline, all without ever formally declaring war. And the domino effect of this new reality is honestly terrifying. In late February 2026, the conflict saw a severe escalation. Israel and the United States launched attacks on Iran, and in immediate response, Iran barred commercial vessel traffic from the Strait of Hormuz, which is yet another insanely vital global waterway. Simultaneously, the Houthis threatened to resume their attacks on Red Sea shipping, so this localized tactic of choking waterways had now been fully adopted as a primary tool of broader regional warfare. Then, on March 28, 2026, those fragile agreements completely shattered. The militia officially resumed their strikes on Israel, fully joining the broader war alongside Iran. That Oman broker deal was dead. The Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz were plunged right back into chaos. And the wild part? Despite all the aircraft carriers, all the international coalitions, and all the diplomatic negotiations, the world was, and still is, basically unable to stop them. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative question. How did a localized militia with absolutely no formal navy fundamentally rewrite the rules of global maritime security? We've explored the geography, the timeline, and this massive David versus Goliath inversion that allowed all of this to happen. It forces us to question literally everything we thought we knew about global power dynamics today. I really hope this explainer gave you a clearer understanding of this ongoing crisis. Thank you so much for joining me, and as always, stay curious.